You're about to discover 6 things that you absolutely need to know about Norwegian Fjords cruising. I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my tips for travelers. The very first thing you need to know about a Norwegian Fjords cruise is you absolutely should do one. I was very skeptical about cruising to the fjords, and I put it off for a very long time. Once I went, it was phenomenal, and I've been many times since. Many parts of the Norwegian fjords have been declared UNESCO World Heritage Sites for a very good reason. Beautiful scenery, huge big soaring cliffs, waterfalls, quaint scenic towns which only have 300-400 population. Whatever time of day you're cruising through there in the season, in summer, it's scenery all around you. It's an absolute must-do. It is one of the most beautiful parts of the world I have ever cruised to. The second really critical thing to know is there are 3 different itineraries, and you need to choose the one that best suits you. The main itinerary, and probably the most classic itinerary, is the classic Norwegian Fjords cruise, where you will normally sail out of a port, perhaps in the UK like Southampton or Dover or perhaps Amsterdam, and you'll spend one day cruising up to Norway, a couple of days cruising through the fjords, and then one day back. So they tend to be 7-day cruises. This is the classic cruise, and the one I would certainly recommend for first-time visitors to the fjords. The second one is what's known as coastal Norway, and this is particularly popular with people in Scandinavia, in particular Norwegian residents, or those of you who really want to get an in-depth look at Norway. These cruises can take up to 12 days, and they basically work their way, normally starting in Bergen. They'll work their way up, calling it multiple ports, 30 or 40 ports up the way, right up to the north to a place called Kirkenes. One of the main operators on this route is Hurtigruten, which is a Norwegian cruise line, and they basically also operate cargo and car passengers all the way up there. But it is an absolute must if you want a deep dive, and particularly if you want a slightly more even expedition look at Norway. This is particularly good for people who want to go back to Norway and see it in more detail after they've done the classic trip. The third itinerary is Arctic Norway. So these focus right up in the north of Norway, and as the name would suggest, it tends to be once you've passed the Arctic Circle, so right up by Tromsø. And you could even go right up even further than that, right up to Svalbard, for example. These are particularly good to go at winter time for really winter wonderland type cruises, and they're very popular towards the end of the year in those cold periods to see the northern lights when you have very short days, lots of darkness. Really popular for the northern lights. As you look at itineraries, there is a really big watch out that I would give to you when you look at the different itineraries to the Norwegian fjords. Make sure that whatever itinerary you choose has primarily or mostly Norwegian fjord towns. So the sort of things to look out for on itineraries are the following. You look out for Granger is a World Heritage Site. It's one of the most famous places to call on. Another key one to look out for is Flam. This is a really charming little town and is best known for the Flam Railway, which is over 65 years old, rises right up into the mountains in a sort of a narrow gauge railway. Also look out for places like Olden. Olden is really great because it gives you access to the Jostendal Glacier, and Skjolden, which is a beautiful tiny little town, and again that gives you access to another glacier called the Jostendal Breen Glacier. So always look at the itinerary for these little towns. What you'll find often on itineraries are more of the gateway cities. So for example, you might see Bergen, which is known as the gateway to the fjords, or Stavanger, which is the oil capital of Norway. Whilst these are nice enough towns, they're like going to visit big towns and you're not really right in the heart of the fjords. So try and make sure when you're booking a cruise that you have mostly those small little towns and only 1 or 2 of places like Bergen and Stavanger. If you do go to those places, make the most of them. So for example, in Bergen, you can either go up in the funicular or in the cable car right to the top of Mount Ulrika or Mount Floyden, and you get great views across the city and out into the fjords. If you head to Stavanger, don't focus on the town, not very interesting town. Go on one of the boat tours that take you to Pilgrim Rock, and you get phenomenal views of the fjords. And this is in Leisefjorden. The next critical thing when you're looking at planning a Norwegian fjord is looking at the best time to go for you. The main season really is the European summer season, and this is the most popular time to go. It's when you're going to have the most amount of choice of different cruise lines to go. You're also going to have very, very long days, so expect to have almost no nighttime darkness, which is particularly great because as you cruise through the fjords, you have that scenery all around you. So when I've been on Norwegian fjords, we've been out sort of 11 o'clock at night, it's daylight, and just immersing ourselves and enjoying the beautiful scenery. June to August is the real heart of the season. I actually like going early on in the season, so sort of April, May time, and that's because you have incredible waterfalls. So as the ice and snow on the top of the mountains starts to melt, you have these beautiful waterfalls. It's not the warmest part of the year, but it is the most spectacular. Bear in mind, if you do go to Norway, you're not going to have phenomenal weather, so you are going to have to pack layers and really kind of make sure that you've got stuff to cope with not particularly warm weather anyway. So May for me is one of my most favorite times, and it's also less busy. If you do want to go and have a beautiful winter wonderland, as I mentioned earlier, the critical time to go is in the winter months, and you'll often find around about sort of November, December time is a really great time to go, and you'll see the Northern Lights and have dog sleighing and beautiful outdoor experiences. The fourth thing I think you need to know about a Norwegian Fjords cruise is it's very easy, very organized to actually tour by yourself and not rely on cruise line excursions. Of course, if you want the security and the safety of going on a cruise line excursion, then focus on that. They will have a very wide range of excursions. A lot of people like to go on cruise line excursions, of course, because they guarantee that if that excursion runs late, the ship will wait for you, which they don't guarantee if you're touring by yourself or go independently. But I would actually strongly encourage you to think about touring by yourself. All of these towns, although they have tiny populations, many of them, just a few hundred, they are very, very geared up to tourists and very geared up to cruise ships. So when you get into the port, whether you're tendering in or walking off the ship, you will find as you come off there are a myriad of providers and tour companies and options at very good prices. And they will do all of the key features. You'll also find in many of these places they have a hop-on, hop-off bus. And again, I would encourage you to do that because even in places like Garanga, they head right up the hills, right up to the scenic spots. So you get to see all the sights and things that you want to do for much, much less than going on an excursion. Certainly they're incredibly organized and ready to cater for cruise passengers. As you plan excursions, there's a couple of things that I think you should really focus on if you head into the fjords to get the most of the fjords experience. There's basically three key things that you should do. The first of these is whichever the places you go to, even if you go to the towns, is aim to get to the highest possible spot closest or in the town. This is because the scenery is phenomenal and you're going to get phenomenal views. So as I mentioned earlier, in Bergen you can go up the funicular or up the cable car. In Flam you can go on the railway right up incredibly high. So in all these places, focus a lot on going to the highest possible spot. The second thing, which I also recommend, it might sound slightly strange, is get on the water. You're going to find lots of opportunities to go on RRB boat tours, kayaking, or even pleasure boat tours. As I mentioned in Stavanger, you can go out to Pilgrim's Rock, for example, on boat excursions. Get out on the water and really get into the incredible little nooks and crannies in the fjords. That's the second key thing to do. The third, of course, which is what a lot of people like to do, is go and look at glaciers. And the earlier in the season is particularly a good time to go glaciers because it's right early on and it's very pristine after the winter. Those are the three big things to do. And as I mentioned, you can do those with the ship or you can do those as you step off the ship and make your own plans. The next critical thing to think about and that you should know is there is a huge range of cruise lines that head up into the Norwegian fjords. And you need to make sure you choose the right cruise line so that your overall experience is really good. So you're going to find quite large ships actually going to the fjords because they are incredibly deep. So even the quite big ships can go in. Many of the places you go to are tiny, as I've mentioned. And so if you go on a really big ship, you could find that these places are almost overwhelmed. So I like to go on sort of more mid-sized and smaller ships, but you'll find Cunard go there, P&O go there, Royal Caribbean go there, Holland America go there. All of those cruise lines go. You'll also find the smaller lines will go there, but much less frequently. So really choose the cruise line also that matches you. So if you like a formal dressing up kind of experience as your overall holiday experience, choose a Cunard. If you want to go more informal, of course, you might want to choose a Norwegian cruise line. So also think about the kind of experience you want and the kind of people you want. Another cruise line to really look at is Hurtigruten. They are native to the region. They are real experts in Norway, and they also, many of the cruises will have a slightly more expedition type approach. They'll have lots of speakers on board. So really think carefully about the kind of experience that you want. The next thing to think about is budgeting. Obviously, depending on what cruise line you go with, your fare and what's included will be one factor, and that's something you can decide on based on what your budget is and how you want to really travel. One of the things that you may want to consider is a balcony cabin. As you start budgeting and thinking about it, see if you could actually afford a balcony cabin, because as I mentioned, as you sail through the fjords, you have incredible scenery, and actually just sitting on your balcony or just having a balcony to go out and enjoy it is a real big plus. So that's something you may want to think about when you're budgeting. The other thing to think about is actually on land, purchasing and buying things is pretty expensive. They're not in the EU, so the currency is the Norwegian krona, but you'll find things are very expensive. So whether you're drinking, eating, buying souvenirs, it's very expensive. Also in Norway, shops are closed on Sunday. So as you plan buying your souvenirs, bear in mind that you're not even in the big tourist towns necessarily going to find things open if you're there on a Sunday. Going to the Norwegian Fjords, as I mentioned, I was really skeptical about it. It's a phenomenal experience. You need to take some planning and thinking about to make sure that you get an itinerary that really optimizes your time in the fjords and the kind of experience you want as you think about the cruise line that you're choosing. I have loads more videos packed full of cruising advice, tips, and reviews of cruise lines and ships. So why don't you watch another one of those right now?